My name is Claire, and at 36, I learned that in my family, there were two kinds of people: the ones who got a seat at the table, and the ones who set it. I had been setting it for 12 years, booking the venues, calling the vendors, managing the budgets, coordinating the schedules, sending the reminders, solving the problems that nobody else noticed until they became emergencies. 12 years of Tuesdays spent on hold with insurance companies. 12 years of Sundays lost to spreadsheets nobody asked to see. 12 years of being the person my family called when something broke and forgot about when something was worth celebrating. I didn't mind. Or I told myself I didn't mind, which is a different thing entirely. But on the night of my brother's engagement party, the party I had spent 4 months building from scratch, I found my name on a printed sheet near the kitchen entrance. Not on the guest list, on the volunteer staff list. Event coordinator. That was my title. Not sister. Not family. Coordinator. I stood there holding that sheet of paper in a dress I had bought specifically for that night, next to a floral arrangement I had sourced from 3 different vendors, and I did the math. 12 years. 1 printed sheet. 0 chairs with my name on them. And I had a folder in my bag that was about to change everything. Welcome back to Betrayal, where the people who held everything together finally decide to put it down. If this story sounds familiar, drop a comment below. And if you're new here, subscribe, because the story I'm about to tell you doesn't end in the kitchen. It ends at a table I built myself. Before I tell you what happened, let me tell you who I am. I'm a financial analyst. I spend my days looking at numbers that don't add up and finding the exact moment where the story changed. I'm good at it. Not because I was born with some gift, but because I grew up in a house where nobody else was paying attention, and someone had to. I put myself through college on scholarships and part-time work. I graduated with honors and 0 student loan help from my parents, not because they were cruel, but because the concept of asking them for anything had never really worked out in practice. By the time I was 22, I had my own apartment, my own car, and a habit of solving problems quietly that would follow me into every room I ever entered. My mother, Sandra, grew up with very little. And I mean that literally. She grew up in a town where very little was the expectation and anything more was suspicious. She carried that scarcity into our home, not as poverty, but as allocation. Love, in Sandra's world, was a limited resource. You gave it where it returned the most. You invested it in the child who brought the brightest future back to the family. That child was my brother Ryan. Ryan is 4 years younger than me, 32 now, and he moves through the world the way people do when they've never had to explain themselves. He's charming. He's funny in the way that fills a room. He forgets important dates, and somehow the forgetting becomes endearing. He missed our mother's birthday 3 years in a row. I sent the flowers in his name each time. He got the phone calls, the long ones. The ones that started with, "Oh, Ryan, you always remember." I don't say this with bitterness. I say it because it is the architecture of what happened later, and you need to understand the blueprint before you see what was built on top of it. My father, Robert, is 61 years old and has always needed an audience. He coached Ryan's little league team for 6 years. He ran for city council twice. He gives toasts at every family event that run exactly 4 minutes too long. Robert is not a bad man. He is a man who measures his worth by the room's attention, and rooms that don't give him attention stop existing in his memory. I was that kind of room. And then there was my grandmother, my father's mother, Eleanor, 84 years old, sharp as a tack, sits by the window with a crossword puzzle and a cup of tea she lets go cold because she's too busy watching people to remember to drink it. Eleanor never once called me the organized one. She called me Claire. In 12 years, she was the only one who consistently did. 3 years before the engagement party, I found out my parents were behind on their mortgage. I didn't find out because they told me. I found out the way I find out most things in my family, by accident, while handling something else. I was at their house helping my mother reorganize her home office, which had reached a level of paper chaos that was becoming a health code concern. I was sorting mail into piles. Bill, junk, bill, and then a letter from their mortgage servicer marked second notice. I opened it. They were 4 months behind. Not because they were broke. My father had a pension. My mother had a part-time job she actually liked. They were behind because nobody had been paying attention and the account had drifted, and neither of them had noticed because neither of them managed their own finances with any real consistency. I set the letter down. I walked into the kitchen. My mother was making coffee. I said, "Mom, are you guys behind on the mortgage?" She turned around, looked at the letter in my hand, and her face did a complicated thing. Embarrassment and relief at the same time. "It's fine," she said. "It'll work itself out." It would not have worked itself out. I called the mortgage servicer that afternoon. I set up a repayment arrangement. And then, for the next 34 months, I quietly covered the shortfall in their monthly payment from my own account. Not the full payment. Just the gap between what they consistently sent and what was actually owed. Some months it was $200. Some months it was $600. Over 34 months, it added up to $14,200. I kept every transfer receipt in a folder on my desktop labeled simply, "Family." I told no one. Not because I wanted credit. At least, that's what I told myself then. Now I think I told no one because I had been trained from childhood to believe that doing the essential thing quietly was the price of being loved. That the asking for recognition would cost me more than the silence. Every month, I moved the money and waited. Not for a thank you, just for some acknowledgement that they knew, that they saw, that the account staying current wasn't magic, that someone was standing behind the curtain making it work. The call never came. Eleanor knew something was happening. She didn't know the specifics, but she had the instinct of someone who had watched a family for 84 years and could read the patterns in the way a weather forecaster reads clouds. One afternoon, she pulled me aside at Sunday dinner and said, "You're carrying something, Claire. I can see it in how you hold your shoulders." I told her everything was fine. She looked at me over her tea and said, "The people who are fine never have to say it." She didn't push. She just watched. And I kept the folder. I'll tell you what I did with it. But first, let me tell you about the party. Ryan got engaged in February. Her name is Ashley. She's perfectly nice. She grew up 3 towns over, and her family has a golden retriever and a hot tub, and the kind of easy warmth that comes from never having had to earn a room's approval. She loves Ryan in the uncomplicated way that I think he genuinely deserves, whatever I think of everything else. The engagement party was my mother's idea. "Something elegant," she said. "Something the whole family can celebrate." She said this on the phone on a Thursday afternoon in March, which meant she had already decided I would handle it. She didn't ask. She never asked. She said it the way you tell someone the weather, as if my handling it was a fact of nature rather than a choice I was making. "Can you coordinate everything?" She added it at the end like punctuation. I said yes. Because I always said yes. I started a planning document that same evening. Venue options, catering quotes, decor ideas, guest list template, timeline of tasks. I put it in a shared folder and sent my mother the link. She opened it twice in 4 months. She never added a single comment. I booked a private room at a restaurant called the Whitmore. It was a beautiful space. Exposed brick, warm lighting, a private bar, a garden view. It fit 72 people and had a catering team that could handle dietary restrictions without making it a production. I spent 6 weekends on the details. I coordinated with the florist over 11 emails. I found a photographer on a recommendation from a colleague and negotiated the rate down by $200. I created a seating chart in Excel with color-coded notes for allergies, plus ones, and family dynamics that required management. I designed a photo display for the entry wall. 12 photographs. Ryan and Ashley's relationship timeline on one side, family photos on the other. I was in 4 of the family photos. I chose them carefully. Not out of vanity, but because it was a family celebration and I was, technically, family. I had it printed and framed. The week before the party, I drove 40 minutes to pick up the printed display because the vendor's delivery driver had called out sick and I didn't want it to be late. I put it in my back seat, drove home, and leaned it against my hallway wall. Standing there looking at it, I felt something I had not felt in a long time. Pride. Real, uncomplicated pride. Not in the logistics, but in the thing itself. The photographs. The way it told the story of people I loved, including myself, in a room that was about to celebrate one of the best things to happen to our family. I thought, maybe this time, someone would look at that wall and say her name out loud. Not the organized one, not just Claire, but Claire, who made this happen. Claire, who put this together. Claire, who is also here, also celebrating, also part of this. I drove to the venue the morning of the party with the display in my back seat and a folder in my bag that I had been quietly building for 3 years. I had not planned to bring the folder, but something in me knew, the way you know sometimes before you know, that I might need it. I arrived at the Whitmore 2 hours before the guests. The setup team was already there. I walked them through the layout, confirmed the bar configuration, checked the floral delivery against my order sheet, and then carried the photo display through the main entrance and positioned it on the entry wall. It looked exactly right. Ryan and Ashley on the left, family on the right. 12 photographs, warm light, clean frames. I stood back and looked at it for a moment. Then I went to the coordinator's table near the entrance to check the printed materials. There was a stack of papers face down on the table. I flipped the top one over. It was the event run sheet. My event run sheet. The one I had created and sent to the venue manager 6 weeks prior. And at the top, in a section I had never written, someone had added a header. Event staff and volunteers. Under it, 2 names. The venue's coordinator. And mine. Claire Whitfield. Event coordinator. Volunteer. I read it twice. Then I picked up the full stack and flipped through. The guest list was underneath. 71 names. My mother, my father, Ryan, Ashley, Ashley's family. Both sets of grandparents, cousins, family friends, colleagues of my parents. My name was not on the guest list. I set the papers down and stood very still for a moment. The florist was arranging the centerpieces behind me. The bar staff was cutting lemons. Soft music was coming through the speakers, a playlist I had curated and sent to the venue 3 weeks prior. I walked to the entry wall. The photo display was exactly where I had placed it 40 minutes earlier, but something was different. It took me a moment to see it. The family side had been rearranged. Ryan and Ashley's side was untouched. But the family photographs on the right side had been adjusted. 3 of the 12 pictures had been swapped out for photos I hadn't provided. Photos from Ashley's family that someone, presumably my mother, had sent to the venue after I'd submitted the original. The 4 photographs I had chosen that included me were gone. All 4 of them. In their place were photos of Ryan as a child, my parents at an old vacation, and 2 pictures of Ashley's family that were perfectly lovely and had nothing to do with me. I was not in a single photograph on that wall. I stood there in the dress I had bought for that night, in the room I had booked, next to the floral arrangements I had sourced, looking at a wall that told the story of my family without me in it. My father walked in at that moment, saw me standing by the display, and smiled. He clapped me on the shoulder, the warm, distracted pat of someone acknowledging a useful presence. Claire, the caterer needs someone to confirm the dessert additions. Ashley's mom added a few items last minute. Can you handle it? He was already turning away before he finished the sentence. I stood there for 1 full minute. Then I walked to the kitchen and confirmed the dessert additions. Because that's what I did. That's what I had always done. I spent the first 40 minutes of the party near the kitchen entrance, managing a last-minute vendor call about the overtime charge for the photographer, answering 3 texts from my mother about where specific guests should be redirected, and making sure the dessert display was arranged correctly. When I finally looked up, the party was in full swing. Ryan was at the center table, arm around Ashley, laughing at something her father had said. My parents were on either side of them, glowing. The room was full of people I had personally invited, sitting in chairs I had personally arranged, eating food I had personally sourced, in a space I had personally booked. And I was standing near the kitchen with a vendor contract on my phone. I found an empty chair at the edge of the room, near the service entrance, and sat down. I sat there for 14 minutes. I counted, because that's what I do when I need to stay calm. I count. I measure. I find the number that tells me where I actually am. 14 minutes. 0 people came to check on me. Not my mother. Not my father. Not Ryan. Not one person at that party, in that room, came to the edge of it to see whether I was there. That was the answer to a question I had been afraid to ask for 12 years. I want to tell you what I felt sitting in that chair, because it was not what you might expect. I didn't feel angry. I felt clear. There is a specific kind of clarity that arrives when the evidence finally outweighs the hope. When the thing you have been telling yourself, that things will change, that they see you really, that next time will be different, stops being a comfort and starts being a liability. I sat in that chair and did the math. 12 years of coordination, administration, crisis management, and family infrastructure. 34 months of mortgage shortfall payments. $14,200, quietly transferred, quietly kept, quietly carried. 4 months of party planning. 6 weekends. 11 emails about flowers. One 40-minute drive to pick up a photo display that no longer included me. And on the other side of the ledger? A volunteer tag and a chair near the service entrance. I was not at that party as a guest. I was there as a contractor. And contractors, I realized, don't get seats at the table. They get invoices. Except I had never sent one. I looked at my bag on the floor beside me. The folder was in there. 34 months of bank transfer receipts. Every vendor invoice from that evening. The original photo display file on my phone, showing all 12 photographs, including the 4 with me in them. I had not planned what came next. But sitting in that chair, I understood something I had been circling for a long time. I had confused being needed with being wanted. And those are not the same thing. Being needed means you are useful. Being wanted means you belong. I had been useful for 12 years. I had never once been made to feel like I belonged. I picked up my bag. I stood up from the chair near the service entrance. I smoothed my dress, and I walked out of the party the same way I had walked into it, steadily, quietly, without making a scene. No announcement, no confrontation, no dramatic exit. I simply stopped being available. That night, I sat at my kitchen table and opened a new spreadsheet. Old habits. The column headers were simple. Task. Frequency. Last completed. Annual hours. I listed everything. It ran to 38 items. I looked at that list the way I look at a financial statement when a client tells me everything is fine, but the numbers say otherwise. The numbers always say otherwise. And then I made a decision. Not a loud one. The quiet kind. The kind that sounds like a lock turning in a door you didn't know you had the key to. I was done working for free. Stay with me, because this is where it gets very quiet and then very loud. Subscribe if you're new, because the next part is the part people talk about. I want to be precise about what I did, because people always imagine something dramatic. A confrontation. A group chat explosion. A social media post. That's not what happened. What happened was much simpler and, in the end, much more effective. I stopped. Monday morning after the party, I removed myself as the primary contact for every vendor, every service, every recurring account I had been managing for my family. The mortgage servicer. I called and updated the account to route statements to my father's email directly. I left a note in the file that the account was current and transferred. The family group chat, the one I had been administering for 4 years, sending birthday reminders, appointment updates, holiday coordination. I changed my notification settings to muted and stopped posting. I didn't leave dramatically. I just went silent. The shared family calendar I had been maintaining since 2020, color-coded, updated weekly, with every birthday, every medical appointment, every important date for 6 family members. I stopped updating it. I didn't delete it. I just stopped. Because here's the thing about invisible work. The only way to make it visible is to stop doing it and let people walk into the space where it used to be. Week 1. Ryan called about the engagement party photos. He didn't know the photographer's name. He didn't have the contact information. He asked me to reach out. I texted him the photographer's website and did not follow up. He didn't get the photos for 3 weeks because he kept forgetting to actually send the email. Also, in week 1, my mother tried to coordinate a family dinner. She posted in the group chat. 3 different family members responded with 3 different dates. Nobody cross-referenced anyone's calendar. Nobody confirmed a location. Nobody followed up. The dinner never happened. Week 2. My father called about a property tax notice for the house. He wanted me to look into it and handle the response. I let it go to voicemail. He called again the next day. I let that go to voicemail too. The notice sat on his kitchen counter. He eventually called the county office himself. The hold time was 22 minutes. He called me afterward to tell me how unreasonable the hold time was. I said, "I know. I've been on that hold a lot." He didn't connect the dots. Week 3. My mother called 3 times in 1 week. Each call was logistical. Where is the login for the home warranty account? What is the name of the plumber I used last spring? Is there a service contract on the HVAC system? I answered each question once, with the information, but no offer to handle anything further. She started each call with her normal tone, expectant, efficient. She ended each one slightly more uncertain. The machine was running without its engine, and the machine was starting to notice. Eleanor called me on a Thursday. She didn't call about logistics. She called to ask how I was doing. I told her the truth, which was that I was tired in a way that sleep didn't fix, and that I had been tired that way for a long time. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "You know what your grandfather used to say? The tree that gives the most shade is the last one they ever water." I held the phone and did not speak for a moment. Then I said, "I'm not going anywhere, Eleanor. I'm just not watering anyone else's yard right now." She said, "Good girl." I hung up and cried for about 7 minutes. Then I washed my face, made coffee, and went back to my spreadsheet. By the end of week 3, the pattern was clear. The foster family, my family, had been running on Claire. And now that Claire had stepped back, nobody was quite sure how to run anything. Not out of stupidity, out of atrophy. When someone does everything for you for long enough, you forget that everything requires doing. They were about to remember. 6 weeks after the engagement party, my father called and asked for a family meeting. He didn't call it that. He called it a sit-down. He said he wanted to talk through some things. He said my mother was stressed. He said the house felt disorganized. He said it in the tone he used when he wanted something, warm and slightly injured at the same time, as if my absence had been a mild inconvenience rather than a 12-year unpaid position I had quietly resigned from. He mentioned, toward the end of the call, that they were looking into refinancing the mortgage, and that it would be really helpful if I could pull together the documentation, since I was so good at that kind of thing. I said I would come to the sit-down. I did not say I would handle the refinancing. That night, I sat at my kitchen table and opened the folder. Not the desktop folder, the physical one. The manila folder I had been keeping in the bottom drawer of my filing cabinet for 3 years, behind my tax returns and my investment statements, labeled simply with one word: family. I went through it page by page. 34 months of bank transfer receipts, each one dated, each one showing the transfer from my account to the mortgage servicer. Each one with a handwritten note in the margin documenting the month it covered and the shortfall amount. $14,200. Underneath those, the engagement party, the signed vendor contract for the venue, the florist invoice, the photographer agreement, the catering addendum with Ashley's mother's last-minute additions. The original photo display file printed on a single sheet, showing all 12 photographs, including the 4 that had included me. And underneath that, a single printed sheet. The volunteer run sheet from the night of the party. My name. Event coordinator. Volunteer. I put everything in order. I made a second copy. I put both copies in a fresh manila folder, set it on the kitchen table, and looked at it for a long moment. Then I picked up my phone and texted my father. "I'll be there Sunday." I drove to my parents' house on a Sunday afternoon in October. The leaves were turning. The neighborhood looked the way it always looked, tidy, familiar, the kind of suburb that believes in its own permanence. I had the folder in my bag. Eleanor was already there when I arrived. She had insisted on being present, though nobody had told her exactly what the meeting was about. She sat in the armchair by the window with her crossword and her cold tea, and when I walked in, she looked up and gave me one slow nod. Ryan was on the couch. Ashley was not with him, which told me he had been briefed and understood this was not a celebration. My mother was in the kitchen. My father was standing near the fireplace, because Robert does not sit when he can stand and be seen standing. I sat down. I put my bag on the floor beside me. I did not take out the folder yet. My father started the way he always started, with the overview. The landscape of the situation as he understood it. The mortgage refinancing opportunity, the documentation required, the timeline from the bank. He built up to the ask the way he always did, by making it sound like the most reasonable thing in the world. You've always been so good at this kind of thing, Claire. It would probably take you a couple of weekends, honestly, he smiled. The smile of a man who has never had to wonder whether his smile would be enough. I reached into my bag and set the folder on the coffee table. I didn't stand up. I didn't raise my voice. I opened the folder and turned it so everyone in the room could see. I want you to understand something first, I said. Nobody spoke. I have been managing the financial and logistical infrastructure of this family for 12 years. Not because anyone asked, because nobody had to ask. It was just understood. I was the one who handled things. I was the organized one. That was my name in this family. Not daughter, not sister. The organized one. I turned to the first section of the folder. 3 years ago, I found a second notice from your mortgage servicer in a pile of mail. You were 4 months behind. I called the servicer. I set up a repayment plan. And for the next 34 months, I covered the shortfall in your monthly payment from my own account. I turned the receipts so my father could see. $14,200. Every transfer dated and documented. I sent no invoice. I asked for nothing. I told no one. My mother made a sound. Not a word, just a sound. I turned to the engagement party section. 4 months ago, Ryan got engaged. Mom called me on a Thursday and said, "Can you coordinate everything?" I said yes. I spent 6 weekends planning the party. I booked the venue, the florist, the photographer, the catering. I designed the photo display, drove 40 minutes to pick it up, and hung it on the entry wall myself. I slid the original display file across the table. 12 photographs, 4 of them with me. This is what I created. Then I placed the second sheet beside it, the photograph from the entry wall at the party, the rearranged version. No photographs of me. This is what was on the wall that night. And then I placed the volunteer run sheet on top of both. And this is where you put me. The room was very quiet. Ryan was looking at the table. My mother had both hands pressed together in her lap. My father's face was cycling through something I recognized from audit rooms. The moment when the numbers don't match the story and the person who told the story is deciding how to respond. He chose offense. You're making this about money, Claire. That is not what family is. We didn't ask you to pay anything. We didn't know you were doing that. I looked at him. I know you didn't know. That's the point. For 12 years, things worked in this family and nobody asked why. Nobody asked how. Nobody asked who. Things just worked. And the reason they worked is because I was working. Constantly. Without acknowledgement, without compensation, without a seat at the table I was setting. My father shook his head. You always understood how this family operates. That sentence. I had been waiting for that sentence. I understand perfectly, I said. That's actually why I'm here. I understand exactly how this family operates. You needed a manager, and you found one, and you called her a daughter because that was more convenient than a paycheck. Dad, Ryan said it quietly. Just the one word. My father turned. Don't, he said. Ryan looked at me. He had the expression of someone who has realized something too late and is doing the math on what that means. Claire, I didn't know about the mortgage. I genuinely didn't know. I know you didn't, Ryan. I believe you. But you knew I was planning that party for 4 months, and you knew whose name ended up on the staff list. And I have a screenshot of the family group chat from the week before the party where you responded to Mom's message about the seating with a laughing emoji. Ryan looked at his hands. I wasn't going to say the next part, but I said it anyway, because it was true, and the truth had been the organizing principle of everything I'd done since I walked out of that party. I spent 12 years making sure this family ran smoothly. I did it because I loved you, and because somewhere along the way I convinced myself that being essential was the same as being valued. It is not. Being essential means you are useful. Being valued means you are seen. And I have been useful to this family for 12 years without being seen once. My mother spoke. Her voice was careful the way it got when she was managing emotion and output simultaneously. Claire, we love you. You know we love you. I know you do. I said it quietly, without anger, because it was true. The love was real. It had just never learned to set a place at the table. But loving someone and valuing them are not the same thing either. You can love someone and still put them on the volunteer list. Eleanor set down her crossword. The room turned to look at her. Eleanor had not spoken since I arrived. She looked at my father. Robert. She said his name, the way mothers say names when the conversation is over and the verdict is in. When she was a little girl, she organized this family's Christmases because nobody else would. She drove me to my appointments when I couldn't drive myself. She paid your mortgage for 3 years because she didn't want you to be embarrassed. She planned your son's engagement party and you put her name on the staff sheet. Eleanor picked up her teacup, looked into it, and set it back down. Whatever you say next had better begin with, "I'm sorry." The room held its breath. My father opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. And for the first time in my memory, Robert, who had coached Little League and run for city council and given a 14-minute toast at his own retirement dinner, had no speech prepared. My mother spoke first. Claire, I'm sorry. She said it simply, without the performance, without the tears she usually deployed as management. Just the words, plain and direct. I'm sorry. I didn't see it. I should have seen it. Robert looked at the folder on the table. At the receipts, the invoices, the volunteer run sheet, the 2 versions of the photo display. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, I didn't know about the mortgage. I know, Dad. $14,000. I know. Why didn't you tell us? Because I didn't think you'd ask. That landed. I watched it land. His face did something I had only seen it do twice before, once when his own father died, and once when Ryan scored the game-winning goal at a high school championship years ago. It went soft. The audience-seeking, room-measuring calculation dropped away for a moment, and underneath it was just a man who had gotten something very wrong and was only now understanding the shape of it. He didn't apologize. Not yet. Not in the complete, unqualified way the moment required. But he looked at the folder and he didn't argue. That was more than I had expected. I closed the folder. I left one copy on the table. I'm not going anywhere, I said. I'm not cutting anyone off. I'm not going to disappear. I looked at my father, then my mother, then Ryan. But I am done being the organized one. I am done being the coordinator. I am done being the person you call when something breaks and forget when something is worth celebrating. I paused. If you want a relationship with me, it starts with my name on a chair. Not a title. Not a job description. My name. Claire. Your daughter. His sister. I stood up. The folder stays, I said. So does the invoice. Eleanor looked up from her armchair. I'll see myself out, Grandma. She shook her head. I'll walk you to the door. She stood up, slower than she used to, and walked beside me to the front door of the house I had been quietly maintaining for 3 years. On the porch, she squeezed my hand once. Harold would have introduced you first at every party. She said it like a fact, not a comfort. Because with Eleanor, it was always facts. I squeezed back. I'll see you Sunday, Eleanor. Every Sunday, she said. My table. You sit wherever you want. The fallout was measurable, which is the only kind I know how to talk about. Week 1 after the meeting, Ryan called the photographer himself. He forgot to include the correct email address in the first message and had to send a follow-up. The photos were delayed by a week. He texted me to say the photographer was hard to reach. I did not respond. Week 2, my father attempted to gather the mortgage refinancing documents himself. He called the servicer, was placed on hold for 19 minutes, and discovered that several of the required documents had been filed under account credentials he didn't have access to, because for 3 years the account had been managed from my phone. He called me. I walked him through where to find the information. I did not offer to do it for him. He said thank you. Twice. Week 3, my mother organized a Sunday dinner. She called me directly, not through the group chat, not as a coordination request, just a call. Her voice was quieter than usual. She said, "I'd like you to come for dinner. No agenda. Just dinner." I said, "Is there anything you need me to bring or handle?" A pause. Then, "Just yourself." I said I'd be there. I brought a bottle of wine and nothing else. It was the first family dinner I had attended in 11 years where I arrived as a guest. Eleanor sat next to me. We talked about her crossword puzzles and a novel she was reading and the way the light looked on the lake her late husband used to love. We talked for 2 hours without once discussing logistics. My father made a toast. It was shorter than usual. 4 sentences. And the last sentence was, to Claire, who has held more of this family together than any of us ever said out loud. We're saying it now. It was not a complete accounting, but it was a beginning. Ryan called me the following week and asked if we could get coffee, just the two of us. We sat at a corner table in a coffee shop on the main street in our hometown, and he said, "I've been thinking about that photo display. The one you made." I waited. "You were in 4 of those pictures." I was. I should have noticed when they were gone. Yeah. He wrapped both hands around his coffee cup. "I'm sorry, Claire. I don't have a better version of that. I just am." It was the most direct thing my brother had said to me in years. I said, "I know." We drank our coffee. We talked about Ashley and his new job and a road trip he was planning for the spring. He asked what I was working on. I told him about a new client, a small business audit that was turning out to be more interesting than expected. He listened. We stayed for an hour and a half. I drove home with the windows down and the radio on and something in my chest that felt, for the first time in a long time, like enough. Here's what I know now that I did not know 12 years ago. The people who love you do not put conditions on your chair. They don't make you earn a seat at the table by being useful. They don't call you the organized one and mean it as a compliment when what they actually mean is, "Keep going, we need you here." They don't put your name on a volunteer list when you are the reason the party exists. The people who love you pull the chair out before you arrive. I spent 12 years in a family that needed me and told me that need was love. It was not love. It was labor. And the day I stopped performing that labor for free was the day I found out what I was actually worth to the people around me. Some of them rose to it. Some of them are still learning. I am at a table now, a real one that I built myself, surrounded by people who have never once asked me to handle something without first asking how I was doing. Eleanor comes to Sunday dinner every week. She sits wherever she wants. So do I. The organized one retired. Claire showed up in her place. And the chair she sits in, nobody assigned it. She just pulled it up. If this story is yours, if you have been the one who held it all together and got seated last, this is your sign. You are allowed to put it down. You are allowed to stop working for people who have mistaken your love for free labor, and you are allowed to find your table. Drop a comment that says, "I see you," if you've ever been the family's invisible engine. I read every single one. Subscribe if this is your first time here, because every story on this channel is for the person who finally decided their name deserved a chair. I'll see you in the next one.